All right. Well, 2026, we've shared the last couple of weeks. This is going to be the year we develop. And we believe this through the church, that incredible things are going to happen through the church, but we also believe this, that we are the church. So it's not just the building, but it is us as individuals, that as we come and we claim this as our church, that this is the word that God is speaking over us this year. Develop, developing, development, developed, developer, those who develop others, and believing that God is going to do incredible things. But what I love about this is as we follow Jesus, it's not just about our spiritual walk. Following Jesus is meant to impact every area of our life. Every part of our life. When we say yes to Jesus, it's not, yes, Jesus, you can have the spiritual part of my heart and you can have my Sundays, and then the rest of our life, we do what we want, and the rest of the week, we do what we want. It's every area and every day and everything belongs to Him, including our families. The book of Joshua ends with Israel. They've finally begun to live in the promised land, right? For generations, they've had this promise to Abraham that I'm going to give this land to you and your descendants, and you're going to live there. And then they go through slavery. They go through generations of not having a place, of being, what the Bible calls it, sojourners, wanderers throughout the land without having a home of their own. And finally, they get to the end of the book of Joshua. They've begun to live in the promised land, and Joshua begins to give his final speech as their leader before he dies. Right? Only a couple generations prior to Joshua and this generation, the Israelites had been slaves in Egypt. Right? God used plagues to deliver them from slavery, and we watch as He delivers them. But what I love about this is, as you look at the 10 plagues, these aren't just random plagues. These were actually designed, each and every one, to specifically counteract an Egyptian god. And so there was Egyptian gods of fertility. There was Egyptian gods that were represented by cattle. There was Egyptian gods over the harvest. There was all these Egyptian gods that the Egyptians worshipped a variety of. And so every single plague that God sent was specifically designed to counteract one of the Egyptian gods. And God was showing, I am greater than the false gods of Egypt. And He showed His power. And so Israelites' journey with discovering who God was, because when God first sent Moses, Moses said, who am I supposed to tell him? You say you're God, but the world has all kinds of, who am I supposed to say? And He revealed to them, Moses, He said, tell them I am. It's where we get the name Yahweh for God from. And so all of a sudden, God began to reveal Himself. He said, this is who I am. And He began to reveal, He says, I am greater than every Egyptian god. And He used these plagues to deliver the people. He led them through the Red Sea. He kept them fed and blessed in a desert for 40 years, even when they walked in disobedience. Finally, they began to come to the promised land, and even before they get to move into it, they're attacked by a couple of different kings, and all of a sudden they begin to claim victories that they shouldn't be able to win, and yet God begins to open the doors for them to defeat nations and kings that have been established in the land. And all of a sudden, as they began, when the time comes to enter into the promised land, they start with Jericho, and they begin to move through the land. And nation after nation falls before them as God reveals again, I'm greater than the God of the Canaanites. I'm greater than the God of the Amorites. I'm greater than the false gods of these people, and I want you to know who I am. And yet, under Moses, the people wanted to return to Egypt, where they'd been slaves. In the promised land, they wanted to intermarry with those who were there, and they wanted to begin to follow the gods of the people who they have just watched God overcome and destroy. They'd wanted to turn to follow after the ways of their own heart because there was desires, and they were drawn to those things. And Joshua knew the fickleness of our hearts, and the reality is the same can be said today. Right? We know what's good, and we are drawn towards what's evil. Paul writes in the Bible, he says, I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. Right? There's times in our hearts where we're drawn to the things we know we shouldn't be, but the things that we know we should be, we find ourselves struggling to be drawn through. And so we're drawn, and we still battle the same things that the people of Israel did today. And that's why when we read through the Old Testament, we understand that it's still relevant today because they struggled with the same things we did. We may not be going back to Egypt, and we may not be looking at false gods, but we're looking at our own desires. Well, I know I want to follow Jesus, but I know that I want this. And we're torn in two directions. We're torn in different ways. And our heart wants to follow Jesus, but it also wants to engage in selfishness. It wants to indulge in what it wants. It wants to do what we want to do and not what Jesus calls us to do. And Joshua knew this for the people even then. And Joshua was getting ready to die, and so he began to warn the people. He knew the temptations of the world were there, and so he began to challenge the Israelites with these last words. Joshua 24, 14 and 15. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshiped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in the land in whose land you're living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. This is going to be kind of the foundation for our series, and this is my challenge to you today. Follow Jesus. But if it doesn't seem desirable, then choose whom you're going to serve. But there's no more walking the line. There's no more saying, well, I believe in Jesus and I call myself a Christian, but I'm gonna intermingle with the world and live with my own way. Choose today who you're going to be. Choose whom you're going to serve. And I encourage you and I challenge you with this. When you make this decision, it doesn't just affect you, but it affects your household. Choose whom you want to be. Be honest and acknowledge if you believe in Jesus, but you live for yourself. Or if you follow Jesus, choose to live for him in obedience. Make a decision for you and your family today. But as for me and my household, as for Kayla and Anna, we will serve the Lord. Starting off a little heavy today, aren't we? All right. Over the next few weeks, we're going to begin to dive into the different layers. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And we're going to do it unapologetically, and we're going to do it wholeheartedly. But what does that mean to have a household that serves the Lord? We're going to dive into different layers. Next week, we're going to begin to call out the men. Men, how are we called to love and lead as husbands and fathers in our home? Women, how are you called to love and lead as a wife and a mother? Together, how are we called to love and lead when we're blessed with children to raise to follow Jesus? I love that earlier this year, we got to start the very first Sunday of this year. We had Pastor Michael and Becca in, who are very dear to my heart. I love them so much. And we came in and we found out they were coming, and I asked if they wanted to speak. I actually asked Pastor Michael. That was Becca's first time, or one of her first times preaching. And so I wasn't even going to ask her. I asked Pastor Michael, and then the Holy Spirit began to lead and put on her heart a message when they said yes. And so then she jumped in and joined, and they asked, is there anything you want us to speak on? And I gave them free rein, whatever the Holy Spirit puts on your heart. And yet they came in and they began to speak of legacy and family. And I love it because we had already had this series planned without them knowing, where we wanted to begin this year investing into the family. And they began to preach as the Holy Spirit led, and began to just impart incredible wisdom from experience of 20 years of raising over 20 children. See, as we look at statistics today, the marriage numbers are starting to decline. They're saying that the next generations are starting to wait longer to get married, that different things are going on. But statistically, Historically, and it may change a little bit in the years to come, statistically, though, 90% of people will marry at some point in their life. 9 out of 10 people will marry at some point in their life. But before any of us, before anyone ever gets married, before anyone ever has the family, we all start single. And so as we begin to talk about, as for me and my house, we're going to start our series not talking about the husbands and the wives, but addressing what does it look like to be an individual who's single and to make a position and take a stance and say, as for me and my house, I may be single, but I am going to serve the Lord. And to be single and say, I have the desire to be married. I'm not married yet, but I have the desire, but I'm going to put things in place now that for my house, I'm going to serve the Lord. And when I get married and have a family, then we will serve the Lord. And so today we're going to look at 3 different things that you can focus on a single person household. And this one will encourage you. Maybe you're here today and you say, well, I'm married. Or maybe I've already got kids, or I'm not single anymore. This is what I want to encourage you. Tune in today, because the reality is you may be married, but you probably know somebody who's single. And they may need some encouragement. Man, there's times where sometimes the greatest desire of people's heart is to be married, and yet they go through these times of singleness, and it gets heavy, and it hurts, and it's hard as it gets drawn out, and they need to be encouraged. Well, how are you going to encourage them? And so I encourage you, tune in today as we have this. That way you can encourage those in your life. So here's 3 things you can focus on in a single person household to make a declaration that as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. First is this, very simply, seek God. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, if you want to begin to study some of what the Bible says about marriage, go and look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7. The entire section, Paul's addressing different topics from singleness to marriage, and it includes in there advice to stay single. Right? And this isn't a command. This isn't a biblical expectation that Paul says, well, hey, if you hit the age of 20 or 30 or 40 and you're single and you want to get married, Paul's not commanding biblically you've got to stay single, right? This is Paul saying, this is my advice to you as somebody who's gone through life, but he's very clear. He says, this is not a command of God, right? And he gives counsel and wisdom, and he says he knows this advice isn't for everyone, but this is Paul's reasoning, right? Why would Paul say that it's better to stay single? This is Paul's reasoning. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, 32 through the first part of 34. And I want you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the things of the world, how to please his wife, and he is divided. Right? Then he goes on, he says the same thing about a married woman. A married woman is concerned, only a single woman is concerned about the things of the Lord, but a married woman is concerned about her husband, and her attention is divided. But then he ends 1 Corinthians 7:35. I am saying this for your benefit, not to place a limitation on you, but so that without distraction you may give notable and constant service to the Lord. Marriage is an incredible and beautiful gift. But if you're single today, that desire for relationship one day, it's a great thing to desire, but there is one benefit to singleness that you lose the moment you get married, that you lose in your future, and that is your time and availability. And so what Paul is saying is he's saying there's things you can do when you're single that you're not going to be able to do when you're married. And so for this reason, there's benefits. But if you want to get married, get married. But he encourages us in this time, and I encourage you in your time in life. If your desire is to get married, but you're waiting, then use this season to begin to serve the Lord. Because what happens is the moment we get married, then all of a sudden our time becomes split, and we're now dedicated to 2 different things. And that's not a bad thing by any means. It's just the reality of life. There's only so much time in a day. And if I'm going to get married, then I've got to invest into that relationship. And so now part of my time is going to go there. And so Paul encourages us, while you're single, use that time to seek and serve the Lord. Don't just let it wallow away. Don't let it just go by and do nothing, but begin to use that. Right? I love Kayla, but my life, my schedule, my attention, my demands compared to before her are different. I love Anna, but God bless her. One thing I've learned in the last 3.5 months is she did not make the schedule easier. She did not come along and it's like, man, it's so much easier for me to now write a sermon in less time. It's so much easier for us to get the thing. It didn't work that way. Now it's like, okay, well, I'm going to stay up till 2 a.m. tonight, and I'm going to make sure that this gets done because it's got to get done, right? She didn't make this. I wouldn't change anything for the world, but she did not make the schedule easier. Marriage doesn't make the schedule easier. Our time and availability when we're single is something that we can see as a gift, and it's a time that we can begin to invest and say, God, I long for the day that I'm going to be married, and I'm going to celebrate that. But until that day comes, until you bring my spouse in my life, I'm going to be intentional with this time I have. And I'm going to use it for you. And I'm going to invest it into your kingdom. And I'm going to serve. And I'm going to let you use me however you want to use me. And so we begin to seek God. We begin to serve God. And we begin to use this time with wisdom, allowing God to begin to work in our life. This is a time where we can begin to develop habits, where we can begin to seek after him, where we can begin to grow with him. And what we're doing is, as we're seeking God, we're not just wasting that time. We're not setting aside the dream for marriage. What we're doing is as we seek after him, we are creating the foundation that our marriage and relationship is going to be built on. Because we're making a declaration that as an individual, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And if this is already a habit in my life because I develop it when I'm single, then all of a sudden when I get into a relationship, we know, hey, I've got commitments over here. And you may not be able to have the same level of commitments, right? You have kids, you have family. There were times where life is going to change, and you may be able to do more things in one season and less in the next. And that's okay. So you may not do the same amount of things, but when you've built a foundation in your season of being single and saying, God, I am going to seek you, then when the family comes, you're saying, hey, I'm not going to do all of these things before, but seeking God is still going to be a foundation for this relationship. That we're going to seek God together. That as we build this family, as we have kids, that the church is still going to be a priority. And we develop these things when we're single. And we're not just wasting time. We are laying a foundation. I want a relationship set on God. I want a marriage set on God. And so I'm going to build this foundation in my life now. And so we begin in our season of singleness to first seek God. Number 2, seek growth, discipline, and health. And I think this is so important. Don't just look for the right spouse. Use this time to become the right spouse. Don't just try to find the right person. Develop into being the right kind of person. And the reality is we won't learn it all until we're married. We won't figure it all out until we're in that place. But this is the time where we can begin to develop, not just saying, well, this is the kind of guy or girl that I want. This is what I want in a spouse. And instead coming and saying, well, instead of looking for that kind of person, why don't I become that kind of person? Why don't I begin to develop these disciplines in my life? Why don't I begin to grow? That way, when I find my spouse, then I can be a better husband. I can be a better wife. I can be the spouse that they need. And all of a sudden, we're beginning to grow in this season. Right? Part of this is going to be a natural development, because what happens is as I seek after God, because that's my first foundation, then if I'm truly, wholeheartedly, heart, soul, mind, strength, chasing after Jesus, then I'm going to change. And if I'm going to change, I'm going to become more like Jesus. And if I become more like Jesus, then I'm going to become, by default, the kind of spouse that Jesus wants me to be. And so I'm going to begin to grow and become that. So part of that becomes natural, but part of this is definitely going to become intentional. You don't have to be married to read a marriage book. right? You want to learn how to love your spouse, begin to dive into marriage books. Man, there's all kinds of incredible. You can get into. There's a group called Focus on the Family. They've been around for years, and their entire purpose is to invest into families, invest into marriages. You can begin. They've got Christian counselors and all kinds of different books, everything from Gary Chapman and the 5 love languages to Save Your Marriage Before It Starts. And you can get into Les and Leslie Parrott, and you can get into all these different authors, love and respect, and all kinds of different things where you can begin to invest into yourself now and learn, how do I begin to handle these things and begin to develop into these habits before you're ever married. What you're doing is you're planting a seed saying, I want a godly marriage. I want a godly family. And so I'm going to plant those seeds now, not try to plant them when I'm married. Right? We know this in nature. We plant and then we harvest. We don't harvest at the same time we plant. And so we can't wait until we're married and say, okay, now I want a godly marriage. Because you can still have it, but you're not going to reap it right away because you're just planting when you start, and so it's going to take time before you begin to reap that harvest that you started. But if you start before you're married, then by the time that time and season comes and you're ready to get married, there's already going to be fruit that begins to grow in your life to bless your marriage as it starts. So be intentional to seek after growth and discipline and health. Begin to develop better habits now. Become someone now who will be a godly spouse when the time comes. And we talk about seeking health. See, sometimes we think about marriage, and I remember being a youth pastor, and there's always someone who's just looking for that next relationship. They don't know who they are if they're not in a relationship, and those are kind of the extreme sides of things where they have to be in a relationship to feel loved and to feel secure, and then there's others who maybe they're not bouncing from relationship to relationship, but they've got it in their mind, if I can just find that one person, if I can just find my soulmate, then I'll be okay. Then I'll be complete. I'll feel whole. I'll feel loved. I'll be at peace. Whatever it is we think that happens, and sometimes we approach marriage and relationships that way, but the reality is that's not how it works. See, marriage will never complete you. If you're not content now, if you're not whole now, if you're not healthy now, marriage will not make us mentally or emotionally healthy. It will not fill the voids in our heart. These are things that we've got to address in ourselves before we enter into a relationship. All right, if you can't find contentment with being single, then what happens is you're going to get married thinking that this person will make me feel better, this will be everything I need, and all of a sudden we're putting all of our hope in them. And we're looking to them to fill the voids in our heart. And things are going to be good for a while, right? We call it the puppy dog love phase or the honeymoon phase. And everything is rainbows and sunshine. And maybe that lasts for 7 years, 10 years. Maybe it lasts 20 years. And you're good, but you're going to reach a point where all of a sudden something's not there. And we're going to think, well, it's this relationship. Man, I married the wrong person. I shouldn't have married. And we're going to begin to think it's the other person, when in reality there are things in our own heart and life that we were called to address and heal before we got into that relationship. And so this is the time in a season of being single to begin to seek after healing. Not trying to find contentment in somebody else, but learning to love ourselves, learning to love Jesus, learning how much Jesus loves us, that he's the one that will complete us and give us everything we need. That he's the only one that can satisfy the desires of our heart. We need to seek mental and emotional health before marriage because we will not find it in another person in marriage. And as you prepare for marriage, develop dedication, right? Develop discipline now because marriage will not add it to you, right? How can you follow and serve Jesus when you're married and there's more demands on your time? There's more demands on your energy if you've not developed habits now when you're single. How can God trust you with a spouse that you're going to follow him and that you're going to lead your spouse to do the same if God can't trust you to follow him now? Why would God bring a spouse into your life that's going to lead you farther from him? Whether it's in, maybe they're not leading you in a 360 and they're saying, all right, well, we're going to go worship the devil now, right? That's not what I'm saying, and a spouse is not going to lead you away. But they may say, hey, let's go do this weekend. And they want to go out on Saturday night. They want to go somewhere. And then but what that means is now you're coming in, if you come to church on Sunday at all. Maybe you're tired, so you skip church on Sunday. Or maybe you come in and you're late and you're yawning, right? God's not going to bring somebody in who's not going to lead you to edify and grow closer to him. A godly spouse should drive you toward Jesus. So why would God bring someone into your life who by habits, or even worse by lifestyle, will draw you away from him? So we begin to develop habits now. As for me and my life, as for me and my household, as for me and my family, we are going to serve the Lord. And we develop those habits when we're single. Men, how can you lead your wife if you can't lead yourself? Parents, how can you lead your children when you don't have self-discipline to do the things that you need to do? Being single can be hard. I remember before Kayla, the yearning in my heart and the heaviness over a certain time. And some of this is stuff we make up in our minds, right? A certain number begins to loom and, I've reached this age and I should be married. And we begin to look to these other things and add weight that God never intended. Being single can be hard. But if we're intentional, being single can be fruitful. Use this time to prepare. Grow. Learn how to follow God. Make him a foundation in your life. Become and learn how to be a good spouse, because you and your future spouse will be thankful. And the last thing I want to encourage for you today, the reality is those first 2 points, maybe you're single today and you say, I never intend to get married. Well, that's good. Seek God, serve God, and find health. Grow with Jesus. Those things apply to everyone. But this third one, if you're single today and you say, my desire is to one day get married, then this one's for you. Seek a godly person. Right now, too often, I want to say that again because there's some head nods, and like, oh yeah, I get that, Pastor. But I want you to hear that. Seek a godly person. Because this is what happens. Too often, this is on the back burner when this needs to be the first priority. If they are not madly in love with Jesus, then you do not need to entertain falling in love with them. Not they believe in Jesus, not they go to church. I don't even care if they're on a serve team at their church. Madly in love with Jesus. That is the top line, the bottom line, and the only line that we should expect for anyone we even consider dating. Man, that girl's real cute. Does she love Jesus? No. All right, keep moving. Don't entertain it. And we laugh, but I sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, this is the greatest thing. Some of the things that I've seen more than anything else lead people away from Jesus is dating the wrong person. Or what happens is you get families who are in church, and all of a sudden they chase money. Oh, my job wants to give me a promotion, and it's going to be more time, or I'm going to have to move to a different city. And all of a sudden, because they think that this is there, they think this has got to be God's blessing, and they uproot the spiritual foundation they have to chase something else, and it collapses everything around them because they've uprooted everything in pursuit of what they thought looked good. But when we talk about being single, who we date matters. It is so important that we do not entertain the right kind of people. Look, there's going to be a bunch of people out there who are going to look good on the outside. Man, this person, they make me laugh. They're funny. We've got things in common. We share interests. We share dreams. That's great. Do they love Jesus? Because if they don't go any farther. Don't entertain it. Don't let your heart go any farther in line, because the reality is it's much easier to fall in love than we want to pretend it is sometimes. We want to make it romance and we want to make it this big fantasy. The reality is that it is easy for us to fall in love, because love in the worldly sense is an emotion. It comes and goes, and so we can easily fall into that. Some of you are chasing a significant other who's not even in church. You would say today, I believe in God, my faith is important to me, but you're chasing someone who's not even serving Jesus. They may believe in Jesus, but their life contradicts the Bible, and they don't even go to church. Their life is not living in accordance. They're going out and they're in the bars every weekend. They're getting drunk. They're doing drugs. They're living a lifestyle that counteracts God's commands, and yet you're pursuing them even though you would say that I believe in Jesus, my faith is important to me. God cannot bless a relationship that is not set on seeking Him. We've got to make a decision for ourselves, and it starts with step number 1, seek Jesus, seek God. And it continues in step number 2, I'm going to grow to become healthy. I'm going to build disciplines so that I have a foundation on Jesus. But then the third step is making sure that when we seek after somebody in our life, when we begin to date, I'm going to choose somebody who's got the same foundation. I'm not going to try to get somebody who's kind of playing games with Jesus. I'm set on following Jesus as for me and my house. And so if they want to come, then they've got to be set on following Jesus. And here's the deal. I'll be honest. That means you're going to have to wait sometimes. I had some high standards when I wanted to get married. I knew who I was. Now, the reality is I've been in the broken relationships. Right? I don't go into a lot of details. I think I've shared it before, right? But I met a young lady in college, got into the second year of college, began to date. We dated for a year, and then we were engaged. And we were engaged for 7 months before that engagement broke off. And that wrecked me. And so when I go and I begin to tell you about those times of seeking health and seeking healing, it's because I've been there. And it wasn't a quick turnaround where it's like, okay, well, I've been single for a month and I feel better. I'm over the heartbreak. There is some heart-wrenching time of seeking Jesus and asking why. But I made a decision after that time, and I had a standard. I said, I know what I want. I know who I am and who God's called me to be, and I will not sacrifice that. And that means that anybody who wants to come into my life has got to be ready to follow the same path. And that meant waiting. And I got into one other relationship after that, and that one only lasted a few months before I ended up moving out here, and it just kind of dissolved, and it still left heartache. There are still some wounds that I apparently hadn't healed because it hurt. But eventually, as things began to progress, eventually God brought Kayla into place, and everything that I had been trying to fight for. There are other times where I had thought, is this God? I've been trying to fight for relationships. I found people who had met my standards, and I was looking. But when it came to Kayla, I didn't have to do any of that. It fell into place. When we make a decision to seek after God, we may be putting some things on hold, but we'll get the things that God has for us in maturity and in fullness. Set your heart on seeking Jesus. Set your heart on becoming the right kind of spouse. But do not compromise. Because if you set your heart on Jesus, but then you settle for the wrong spouse, it will change your life and not for the better. And as we seek the right spouse, we don't need to do it by dating just to date, right? Dating isn't fishing. It's not catch and release. Well, I'm going to try catfish today and trout tomorrow, right? We don't have to just, I'm going to try to date this person and see if it works out, and then I'm going to date this one. Not every relationship will work, and that's the reality, but we don't just enter into a relationship casually. We don't just enter into it thinking, well, we're just going to test this out, right? We enter into them with the intent of pursuing a future. By the time you make a decision to date someone, it's because you've already checked the boxes, right? Long before you enter into a dating relationship, there should be some sort of relationship based on friendship building. Do they love Jesus? Check. Do they check my personal boxes? What are their interests? What are their hobbies? What is their lifestyle? If you're a gamer and they're an outdoorsman, or if you're a gamer and they absolutely think that's the dumbest thing, there's probably things that are not going to mesh. And so it's making sure that our personal interests and hobbies don't counteract and that we can begin to line up. And so that they check my personal boxes, interests, hobbies. Do they check the core desires? Because if one of you wants children and one of you doesn't, that does not change in marriage. You can't go into a relationship thinking, oh, they'll change their mind one day. You are setting yourself up for failure. Do they match your core desires of having children, not having children? We already have talked about they better love Jesus. And once they check these boxes, and you can see there, I see the potential here, then you can begin to pray about dating them. Now, this next verse I want to read is not about marriage specifically, so I want to give some context, right? In the Bible, context is key. I can make the Bible say anything I want to if I take it out of context. So we always put it in context, right? So this next verse is addressing relationships in general, right? So this is not just marriage, this is relationships in general between Christians and non-Christians, right? And it talks about the temptation of an idolatry, how relationships with non-believers leads believers into idolatry, because this was an issue in Corinthian. And so while that's the context of the verse, the principle of the verse is that those same relationships between a Christian and a non-Christian may not lead us to worship an idol, but it can still lead us to sin. So today I want you to think about this verse in regards to your future spouse and who you marry, but also the people in your life now who are close to you, whether friends or family. And so it applies to all these relationships, but there's no relationship in life closer than who you marry. This person will have the greatest intimate knowledge of you. They will know every moment of who you are, the good, the bad. You'll know everything about them. So this is your most intimate relationship. And so keep that in mind as we read this. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, 14 and 15. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? What harmony is there between Christ and Belial, which is a false god in Corinth? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? Who you're friends with matters. Who you marry is critical. Right, as we read through the Proverbs, 3 times the Proverbs tells us it's better to live in the corner of a roof or in a desert than with a quarrelsome or nagging wife. Twice it says a quarrelsome wife is like a constant drip. Once it even adds, it says that restraining a quarrelsome wife is like restraining the wind. Right? And now, to be clear, we're not just picking on the wives today. Right? The same thing can be said about a husband. Marrying an immature husband who you thought was going to grow up and do the things that you thought he was going to do is going to be like restraining the wind. It's going to be frustrating. It's going to be unfruitful. Marrying a lazy husband or one consumed with self-centered living or childish ways is going to wear you down. So it doesn't matter whether it's the husband or the wife, but what matters is who we marry will impact our life. They will become either the greatest blessing or the greatest frustration. And so if you're single today, don't settle. Don't settle. I know there's times where we feel like the pressure is there. Time's running out. If I'm going to have a family, if I'm going to get married, or maybe it's just I want to spend as much time with the person I'm going to marry as I can in life. Don't settle. Seek a godly spouse. Use this time and this season to become a godly spouse. Prepare yourself. Build a foundation. And use the extra time you have now to seek and serve God. Allow Him to make this season fruitful. Will you guys stand with me this morning? We can throw on the altar music, if you will. I know I didn't have that planned this morning. But as we're going through, I feel like this is a moment that if we let it, can be foundational. Joshua stood up before the people giving his last speech, and he gave the call, choose this day whom you will serve. If serving God doesn't seem desirable, then live for yourself, but don't pretend to live for Jesus anymore. But if you're going to live for Jesus, then choose this day. As for me and my house, make a decision in this moment. And so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to just open up the altars here in just a minute, and we're just going to begin to step out of our seats. If that's you today, it doesn't matter what season of life you're in. Maybe you're here today and you are single, and you're saying, I need to make this decision in my life that I'm going to start a foundation now. Maybe you're here today and you've been married for years. Maybe you're here today and your spouse has passed away, but you are in a position where you need to make a choice today and say, I'm going to start a new foundation that as for me and my house, we're not going to play church, we're not going to play Jesus, but we are going to serve the Lord. And so I call to you today, choose who you will serve. Choose who will you be. What will your house look like? Make a decision for yourself. And make a decision for your family. Choose this day. I'm just going to say a simple prayer, and if that's you, we're just going to take a step out of the altars. It's simply just an act of obedience. Right? Something happens when we begin to step out of our comfort zone, to leave where we are. And so I'm just going to say a simple prayer, and if that's you, we're not going to draw out this time, but we're going to let you just step out, come to the altar, and just begin today to make your stand and to make your choice. Lord, I pray for every person here today in every season of life. Lord, would you lead our families? Would you lead our homes? And would you lead us? Lord, I pray for those today, especially who are single. Lord, whether they've never married, God, whether it's, Lord, been divorced through life or whether it's been tragedy. Lord, but I pray that you begin to mend every single heart, God, those who are broken, those who are hurting, those who are in a place of longing today. Lord, I pray that you'd begin to encourage and call them forward into service to you. Lord, I pray that you begin to build foundations in their life. Lord, I pray that in the weeks to come, would you transform families and homes as we make a choice today? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. For the next couple minutes, if you want to make that decision and dedicate yourself, and whether it's your future family or whether you're married and have a family now, if you're ready to dedicate yourself to the Lord, I just want to open up the altars. Come, stand up here. Just begin to talk to Jesus on your own. And for the next couple minutes, we're going to make a choice over our homes.